When my boyfriend said, "Use my mom's card. There's $200,000 on it. Treat yourself." I smiled instead of crying. I smiled because I didn't want him to see the hesitation in my eyes. I didn't want him to know that my mind was racing, that my heart felt heavy with worry and guilt all at once. $200,000. That's not just a number. That's a life. That's trust. That's someone else's hard work. I remember sitting on his couch, the late afternoon sun spilling through the curtains, dust dancing in the light. I held the card in my hand, and it felt unreal, like a small rectangle carrying the weight of someone else's world. My fingers trembled slightly, and I tried to hide it behind a laugh. "Are you serious?" I asked, but my voice sounded too calm, too polite. He laughed, brushing it off like it was nothing. "Of course I'm serious. Mom wouldn't mind. She wants you to have nice things. Go on, you deserve it." His eyes sparkled with that careless excitement that always made me melt a little, and yet, inside me, something tightened. I couldn't explain it at first. I just knew, deep down, that this wasn't right. And then I thought about my own life, my own struggles, the little apartment I'd painted every color imaginable just to make it feel like home. The extra shifts I'd taken at once just to make rent, just to save for something small. I thought about the nights I'd stayed awake worrying about bills, about dreams I'd had that felt too far away. And now here I was, holding someone else's money like it was mine. I smiled at him, and he smiled back, completely unaware. That smile, that moment, it felt like a quiet test, one I wasn't ready to pass or fail. I put the card in my pocket, but I didn't use it. Not yet. I wanted to think, to breathe, to listen to that small voice in my head whispering, "This isn't yours. This isn't right." Little did I know that one small decision to hold back, to hesitate, would be the first step in a journey that would change everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and the weight of choices. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents weren't wealthy, but they worked hard, always telling me that honesty and kindness were worth more than money. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And I carried that with me into every part of my life, the way I spoke, the way I cared, the way I hoped things would turn out. When I met him, I thought I had found someone who understood that. My boyfriend, Daniel, was different from anyone I'd known. He had this easy charm, the kind that made people laugh without trying too hard. He wasn't rich, not in the way people think about money, but his family, well, that was another story. His mother was wealthy, elegant, and a little distant, the kind of woman who held herself like she'd been painted into a portrait. Daniel grew up in that world, where doors opened a little easier and choices came with fewer consequences. I had only met her a few times, always at brunches or family dinners. She was polite, always smiling, but there was a kind of distance in her eyes, like she was looking at me and trying to see past me at the same time. I told myself that wasn't important. What mattered was Daniel. Living with him for the past year had been a gentle rhythm. Mornings were quiet, filled with the sound of coffee brewing and sunlight spilling across the kitchen table. Evenings were warm, with soft music in the background and the smell of dinner cooking. I loved those small routines. I loved how he would notice if I was tired and bring me a blanket without a word. I loved how our conversations drifted late into the night about dreams, memories, nothing and everything all at once. But living in someone else's orbit always comes with little shadows, tiny things that grow when you don't notice them. Daniel's family lived in a different world, and sometimes it made me feel small, like I didn't quite belong. I would hear stories about trips, expensive gifts, or investments, and I would smile and nod, careful not to let my envy show. I knew it wasn't envy exactly. It was just a quiet, aching awareness of how different our lives were. I remember one night, sitting on the balcony of our apartment, looking at the city lights stretching out below us. Daniel was beside me, talking about a new car his mom wanted to buy for him. She said I could pick whatever I want, he said, almost casually. I laughed softly. That's amazing, I said, though the words felt hollow. I didn't want him to see the tension in my chest. He didn't notice. He never noticed. In the beginning, everything felt easy. We were young, hopeful, and convinced that love could smooth over differences. I told myself that I didn't care about money, about fancy gifts, or about the life his mother could provide. All I cared about was him, the quiet warmth of our mornings, the way he made me feel seen. And yet there were small moments that lingered in my mind. The way his mother would comment on my clothes, not quite cruel, but pointed enough to make me self-conscious. The way she would ask Daniel subtle questions about me, like a test I didn't know I was taking. "Does she cook?" she'd ask once, her tone polite but probing. I had smiled and said yes, of course, because I wanted to please her. But inside, I felt like an imposter, standing in someone else's life, hoping I would measure up. I tried not to let it bother me. I focused on our little apartment, the plants we kept on the windowsill, the notes we left for each other in the kitchen. Daniel would leave a small cup of coffee for me every morning, and I would scribble a tiny thank you on the sticky note and stick it to the fridge. Those moments felt real, tangible, ours. They were reminders that for now, the world outside could wait. Then came the afternoon when he handed me his mother's card. I wasn't prepared for that. I thought I knew him, thought I understood his world, but in that moment, I realized I didn't. His casual tone, his smile, it was as if he were giving me a gift, not realizing the weight of what he was offering. $200,000? That's more than I had ever earned in my entire life, more than I could ever imagine spending. And yet, it wasn't mine, not really. I held the card, turning it over in my hands like it might speak to me, tell me what to do. My thoughts spun in circles. Could I just spend it? Buy things I had always dreamed of? The temptation was there, strong and real. But so was the guilt. And beneath it all, a quiet voice asking me, "Who are you in this story?" I realized then that this story wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about honesty, about the fragile boundaries between love, loyalty, and temptation. And I knew deep down that the choices I made in the next few days would ripple far beyond me, touching hearts I cared about, and perhaps even breaking them. Life had a way of teaching lessons quietly, without warning. And this was going to be one of them. After that day, the card sat in my purse like a quiet weight. I didn't use it, not yet. I wanted to think, to breathe, and understand what it meant. Not just the money, but what it meant for me, for Daniel, and for the fragile web of trust that held our lives together. Every time I looked at it, I felt a tug in two directions. One, the pull of desire, of things I had never had and maybe never would. And two, the tug of conscience, reminding me that this wasn't mine to take. Daniel didn't notice my hesitation. He went about his life as usual, talking about his mother and her plans, about trips they would take, about gifts she would buy. And each time I smiled and nodded, careful not to show that my mind was spinning, careful not to let him see that I was suddenly aware of how different our lives were. One evening we were cooking dinner together, the scent of garlic and onions filling the small kitchen. I tried to concentrate on chopping vegetables, but my thoughts kept drifting. Do I use the card? Could I really spend it and feel okay afterward? I put the knife down and leaned against the counter. "Daniel," I said softly, do you ever think about how your mom feels about money? Like the way she earned it?" He paused, stirring the pasta. "What do you mean?" "I mean, does she care about how it's spent? Or does it just go?" My voice sounded small even to me. He shrugged, not looking at me. "Mom has money. That's all there is to it. She likes me to be happy. That's all that matters. I nodded, but inside, a cold knot formed. That easy dismissal of responsibility, of accountability, it frightened me. I remembered the small lessons my parents had taught me, that money carries weight, that trust can't be borrowed and returned like a book. And yet, here I was, holding a piece of someone else's life in my hands. Over the next few days, the tension grew, quietly. I began noticing little things I had never paid attention to before. The way Daniel's mother would call, casually asking about us. The way she would comment on the apartment, on the food we cooked, on the way I arranged flowers on the table. Always polite, always measured. But underneath it, I felt a quiet judgment. Not good enough. Not like her. I started to feel trapped between two worlds. In Daniel's world, money was a tool, a way to show care and attention. In my world, money was something hard-earned, something that demanded respect and responsibility. And the card had become a symbol of everything I didn't yet understand about this life I had stepped into. Then came the small arguments, the kind that aren't really about the argument at all. "I don't understand why you're so quiet," Daniel said one night, sitting beside me on the couch. His eyes searched mine, gentle but insistent. "I'm just thinking." Thinking about what? Life? Choices? Responsibility? My words sounded heavier than I intended. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You think too much." I forced a smile, but inside a storm was brewing. His world was effortless, and mine was layered with consequences, with small truths that couldn't be ignored. And the card, that small rectangle of plastic, had become a mirror reflecting everything I had tried to keep hidden. My fears, my insecurities, my sense of right and wrong. I started keeping a journal, writing late at night after Daniel had fallen asleep. My hand ached from scribbling down thoughts I couldn't voice aloud. I wrote about the card. I wrote about temptation. I wrote about the small guilt that began creeping into my days. And every time I wrote, I realized something uncomfortable. I couldn't fully trust him. Not yet. Not when he offered something so enormous without even thinking about the consequences. Then came the subtle betrayals, the tiny misunderstandings that felt like cracks forming in a wall. One Saturday, I baked a small cake for Daniel's birthday. I wanted it to be perfect, the way I imagined his mother would approve. I had spent hours measuring, mixing, icing, and finally presenting it to him with a quiet, nervous smile. "Wow," he said, taking a bite. It's okay, I guess." "Okay?" My voice caught in my throat. "Yeah, I mean, it's good, really good." He smiled, trying to reassure me, but the word "okay" lingered in the air like a shadow. I swallowed my hurt and nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing I did would ever be enough in that world. And that world, Daniel's family, the wealth, the effortless life, it was pressing closer, demanding that I either step in fully or retreat completely. Then the card became a silent character in our days. It sat in my purse, or sometimes on the counter, and every time I saw it, my stomach twisted. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on cooking, cleaning, small shared moments with Daniel. But the temptation was quiet, patient, persistent. Use it. Treat yourself. No one will know. And I would shake my head, whispering to myself, "No. Not mine. Not right." One evening, Daniel mentioned a small trip he wanted to take, and without thinking, I asked, Are we using the card?" He looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" You can use it, I told you. I know, I said, my voice barely audible. I don't feel right about it. His smile faltered. Why not? It's nothing. It's just money. And that was the moment I realized how different we really were. To him, money was trivial. To me, it carried weight, responsibility, meaning. That small gap between us felt like a canyon, growing silently with every conversation, every thought, every glance at that card. Then came the whispers of doubt, the inner questioning I couldn't escape. I began imagining scenarios, tiny what ifs that made my heart pound. And the more I tried to suppress those thoughts, the louder they became. I started noticing changes in Daniel too. Subtle things, a sigh when I declined an offer, a frown when I hesitated, a casual comment that carried an edge I hadn't heard before. It wasn't anger, not really, just disappointment. And every time I felt it, I retreated a little further into myself, hiding behind quiet smiles and polite nods. I began avoiding conversations about money, about gifts, about trips. I focused on small, safe things, cooking, cleaning, watching movies together. But even in those moments, the tension lingered, a quiet hum under the surface. And every time Daniel mentioned his mother, her generosity, the card, my stomach twisted, my hands itched to put it away, to forget it even existed. Then, one night, the tension broke in a small, almost accidental way. I just don't understand why you're so hesitant, Daniel said, his voice calm but firm as if he were talking to a child who couldn't see the obvious. I'm just thinking, I replied, my voice shaking slightly. Thinking about what? About responsibility, about right and wrong, about trust. His face softened, but there was a sadness there, a quiet weight. I didn't realize it meant that much to you. I wanted you to feel special. And in that moment, I realized how fragile our trust had become. Not broken, not yet, but fragile, like glass in someone's hand. The card had become more than money. It had become a test, a mirror, a silent judge of who I was, who Daniel was, and how our worlds could coexist or collide. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city hum outside our window. I thought about my parents, about the lessons they had taught me. I thought about Daniel, about love and trust, and the fragility of both. And I realized something uncomfortable. The rising conflict wasn't just about the card. It was about who we were when no one was watching. It was about honesty, integrity, and the quiet courage it takes to say no when everything else says yes. Little did I know, the real turning point was coming, and it would arrive not with a shout or a confrontation or even a clear choice. It would arrive quietly with a single decision, one that would ripple through our lives and change everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and consequences. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of evening that felt like any other, until it wasn't. The sky had turned a soft gray, and rain had begun tapping gently against the window. I was in the kitchen washing dishes, the warm water running over my hands, when Daniel came in holding the card. He looked a little hesitant, a little different from his usual easy smile. "Hey," he said softly, leaning against the counter. "I was thinking, maybe you could use it now. Treat yourself. I don't know. Buy something you've always wanted." I froze, my hands gripping the dish as if it could anchor me in place. My heart thumped against my chest, loud and uneven, as if it were trying to warn me. I looked at him, at the innocence in his eyes, at the careless trust he offered so freely, and I realized something painful. He had no idea that money like this could destroy more than it could give. I I don't know, Daniel, I said, my voice small. I I just I don't feel right about it. He frowned slightly, a wrinkle forming between his brows. Why not? I don't get it. It's my mom's money. She wants you to have it. You've been working so hard. Don't you deserve it? I swallowed hard. It's not mine. And I just, I can't. He shook his head, a quiet frustration in his movements. You're overthinking this. It's just money. I want you to be happy, that's all. That was the moment I realized how differently we saw the world. To him, happiness could be bought with money, with gifts, with cards like this. To me, happiness was fragile, earned in small moments, in honesty, in trust. And the card had become a symbol of everything that could go wrong, everything I feared losing if I crossed this line. I put it down on the counter, gently, as if the card itself were fragile. And then I did something I didn't expect. I left the kitchen. I walked to our bedroom, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. I thought about my parents, about the lessons they had given me in quiet moments, that integrity mattered more than comfort, that choices had weight, even when no one was watching. I thought about Daniel, about how much I loved him and how much I wanted to protect him even from himself. And I realized with a cold clarity that this moment, this small, ordinary Thursday evening, was a turning point. Everything that had been building quietly, subtly, was about to either break or transform. Later that night, I went for a walk in the rain, just to clear my head. The city was quiet, the streets glistening with reflections of streetlights. I wrapped my coat tightly around me, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain, feeling it wash over my shoulders. And as I walked, I understood something I had been avoiding. The real challenge wasn't about the card. The real challenge was about me, my choices, my courage, my willingness to face the consequences of honesty. When I returned, Daniel was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone. He looked up as I entered. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I will be," I said softly, though my heart still felt tight in my chest. "I just needed to think." He nodded, not pressing further. But later, I overheard him on the phone with his mother. His voice was quieter than usual, and I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases like, "She doesn't want to use the card," and "I don't understand her hesitation." I felt a pang of guilt and relief at the same time. Relief because I hadn't crossed the line. Guilt because I could feel the disappointment building, not from malice, but from misunderstanding. A few days later, the first real fracture happened. Daniel's mother invited us to her house for dinner. It was a polite invitation, casual, warm in appearance. I accepted, even though my stomach churned with nerves. I knew these dinners were tests of subtlety, of observation, of small cues that could betray who I truly was. And that night, I felt every eye on me, every word measured, every gesture silently judged. The dinner began innocuously. The table was perfect, set with fine china, silverware that gleamed under soft lights, glasses sparkling with water. Daniel's mother asked about work, about my family, about small details in a way that seemed harmless but carried weight. "You've been cooking for Daniel?" she asked casually, looking at me over her glass. "Yes," I said softly, keeping my hands folded in my lap. "I like to cook." Her eyes lingered on me, and I felt the familiar pinch of inadequacy. Not cruel, not aggressive, just a quiet comparison that made me feel small. And then she said something I will never forget. I hope you understand, money isn't everything, but it can make life easier. I nodded, not wanting to respond, but the words sank into me like stones in water. Money. His mother's money. The card. It wasn't just a gift, it was an expectation, a reminder of difference. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I loved Daniel, how much I wanted to belong, there was a boundary I couldn't cross without losing myself. Later, as we left, Daniel squeezed my hand. He whispered, "You did great tonight." But I felt a quiet distance growing between us. Not in his words, not in his actions, but in the unspoken truth that had begun to stretch between us like a fragile thread. The real turning point came a week later. I had returned to the apartment, exhausted from work, and I found the card missing from its usual place. Panic rose in my chest before I even thought. I searched the apartment, retraced my steps, and then I saw it. Daniel, sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread around him, using the card online. "Daniel!" I cried, my voice shaking. "What are you doing?" He looked up, startled, then guilty. I just wanted to buy you something nice." "You can't do this," I said, my hands trembling. "It's not yours to spend. It's not a gift you get to give." His face fell. I thought it would make you happy." "It's not happiness if it's stolen, Daniel. It's not trust. It's not love. You can't just take what isn't yours and expect everything to be okay." He looked at me, eyes wide, and for a moment I saw the fear in him. Not fear of punishment, but fear of losing me, of realizing that the world I came from, the values I held, were not interchangeable with his. The fight wasn't loud. There was no shouting, no tears, just the quiet unraveling of something delicate and precious. I stepped back, shaking, feeling the weight of the situation settle over us like heavy rain. The card sat on the table between us, a symbol of everything that could be lost. That night, I left the apartment. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed space to think, to breathe, to understand what had happened and what it meant. I walked aimlessly in the rain, listening to the city hum and feeling the cold soak through my coat. And in that quiet solitude, I realized something essential. This moment, painful as it was necessary. It was a mirror, reflecting the truths I had been avoiding about love, about honesty, about courage, about boundaries. I thought about my parents, about the small lessons they had taught me. I thought about Daniel, about how much I loved him, and how much I needed to protect both of us from choices we couldn't take back. And I understood, in the deepest part of myself, that the turning point wasn't just about money. It was about integrity, about the courage to do what's right even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it risks everything you hold dear. By the time I returned, hours later, Daniel was asleep on the couch, the card untouched on the table. I sat down beside him quietly, letting my hand rest on his arm. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The weight of the evening, the rain, the mistakes, and the realizations hung between us. And in that silence, I felt the first real stirrings of something fragile, something hopeful, the possibility of forgiveness, of understanding, of rebuilding trust. It was the hardest lesson I had ever learned, that love is not about giving into temptation, about ignoring consequences, or about taking what isn't yours. Love is about boundaries, about honesty, about facing difficult truths with courage and humility. And sometimes The most painful turning points are the ones that shape us into the people we were always meant to become. The days after that Thursday night were quiet in a way that felt heavy. Not silent exactly, but full of words left unsaid, gestures left undone, and small glances that carried questions neither of us had the courage to voice. Daniel and I moved around each other carefully, our routine still intact, but layered now with an unspoken tension, a fragile thread holding us together. I spent a lot of time alone, sitting on our balcony, watching the rain run down the glass, thinking about everything that had happened. I thought about the card, about the choice not to use it, and about the moment when Daniel had taken it without understanding the weight it carried. I felt sadness, yes, but also clarity. I understood more than ever the difference between intention and action, between love and thoughtlessness. I started writing in my journal again, letting the thoughts pour out in messy sentences that no one would ever read. I wrote about trust, about boundaries, about fear, and about hope. Each word felt like a small step toward making sense of the storm inside me. I realized that forgiveness wouldn't come instantly, not for me, not for him, but it could come slowly, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Daniel noticed my distance, of course. He tried small things to reach me, leaving me coffee in the morning, a small note on the fridge, a bouquet of flowers he picked from a corner shop. At first, I barely noticed. I was wrapped in my own reflections, trying to understand what I wanted, what I needed, and how we could move forward. One evening, he sat down beside me on the couch, his hands folded in his lap. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about what happened with the card. I didn't understand. I still don't fully understand, but I want to. Can you help me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in days. I saw his vulnerability, the way he was trying, and it softened the hard edges around my heart. "Daniel," I said softly, "it's not just about the card. It's about understanding responsibility, about realizing that some things, some choices, have weight, even if they seem small or harmless to you." He nodded slowly. "I know. I see that now. I was careless. I didn't think, and I hurt you. I want to fix that." We talked for hours that night, quietly, carefully, about everything. About money, about trust, about our families, about expectations. I told him how the card made me feel, not just about him, but about the world he came from and the life I had lived. And he listened. Not defensively, not dismissively, but really listened. It wasn't an easy conversation. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes more than once, and he flinched as if he could feel the weight of every word. But slowly, gently, we began to bridge the gap. We didn't solve everything, not that night, but we began to understand each other. And that understanding, fragile though it was, felt like the first real step toward healing. The next week, we returned the car to its proper place. We didn't speak about it much, not in the way we had before, but the tension had lifted slightly. There was a quiet acknowledgement that some lessons are learned the hard way, and that love, to survive, must carry patience, humility, and honesty. I also started reflecting on my own role in the conflict. I realized that my fear, my hesitation, my judgment of Daniel's carelessness had been both protective and isolating. I had built walls around myself, believing that distance was safety, but safety isn't built on walls. It's built on trust, communication, and courage. And I had to take the first step, even if it scared me, even if it risked more hurt. One Sunday, we went for a walk in the park, the kind of walk we used to take when the world felt simple. The trees were just beginning to turn gold, the air crisp and clean. Daniel reached for my hand, and I hesitated for a moment before allowing him to hold it. The small gesture felt monumental, a quiet reconciliation, a soft promise that we were willing to try again. "I want you to know," he said as we walked, "that I don't want money to ever come between us again. I see now that there are things more important than gifts, more important than anything money can buy." I smiled, feeling the tension in my chest ease slightly. "I know," I said. "I don't want money to come between us either, but I also want you to understand. I need honesty, respect, and care for boundaries. That matters more than anything." We walked in silence for a while, just feeling the cool breeze, listening to the crunch of leaves under our feet. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost sacred. The storm had passed, or at least slowed, leaving us with clarity and quiet understanding. Over the next few months, things didn't magically return to the way they had been before the card, but we learned to communicate better, to ask questions before assuming, to pause before acting. We discovered the importance of small gestures, of apologies given sincerely, of patience when one is hurt. And slowly, carefully, the trust that had been shaken began to rebuild itself, brick by brick. I also started to see Daniel's mother differently. She wasn't cruel or unkind, just human, with her own expectations, her own ways of showing care. I realized that the tension I had felt at dinners wasn't about me being inadequate. It was about navigating worlds that were very different, learning to honor them without losing myself. And I did my best, quietly, patiently, to find that balance. One afternoon, while cleaning our apartment, I found the card tucked behind a drawer, forgotten. I picked it up, feeling the smooth plastic under my fingers. It didn't tempt me anymore. Instead, it reminded me of everything we had gone through: the fear, the hesitation, the arguments, the quiet moments of reflection, and finally, the conversations that had brought us closer. I realized that the turning point, painful as it had been, had given me something invaluable: perspective. It had reminded me of the importance of holding on to your values, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when love makes it tempting to compromise. And it had reminded me that love is not just a feeling. It's an action, a choice, and a willingness to grow together through mistakes and misunderstandings. We began cooking together again, slowly, without pressure, without the need to impress anyone. I learned that small moments, sharing a meal, leaving a note, laughing over something trivial, carried more weight than any expensive gift. Daniel began noticing these things too, commenting on them with genuine warmth, not because he was trying to fix anything, but because he was learning to appreciate the quiet rhythms of life that really mattered. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony, rain tapping softly against the glass, Daniel said, "Thank you for helping me understand. I know I was careless. I want to do better. I want us to be better." I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling the tension of the past weeks dissolve slowly. "We're learning," I said. "Together. That's what matters." It wasn't a perfect ending. There is no perfect ending in life, but it was real. And in that reality, I found peace. Picard, the temptation, the misunderstandings, they were all part of the story that had taught me about honesty, about love, about patience, and about the courage to hold on to your principles even when the world around you seems to offer shortcuts. I also learned something unexpected about myself, that I could be tempted, that I could hesitate, that I could struggle with choices and yet still come through with integrity. That quiet courage, the kind that doesn't make noise or demand applause, is sometimes the most powerful kind of strength. In the weeks and months that followed, our relationship settled into a new rhythm, quieter, calmer, but stronger. We laughed more easily, spoke more openly, and held on to each other with the gentle understanding that mistakes don't have to define you, but they can teach you. I realized that this resolution, this slow rebuilding, was more than just a patch over a fractured moment. It was a lesson in love, a lesson in trust, and a lesson in the quiet power of doing what is right, even when it's hard. And every time I saw that card, now tucked safely away, forgotten but remembered, I felt gratitude. Gratitude not for the money it represented, but for the experience, the lesson, and the growth it had brought into our lives. Life has a way of testing us quietly, gently, and sometimes painfully, and it's not the test itself that defines us, but the way we respond. We can take the easy path, the tempting path, and risk everything we care about. Or we can pause, breathe, reflect, and choose with integrity, even when it's uncomfortable. That was the lesson I carried forward. That was the resolution of our story, not in drama or grand gestures, but in small, daily acts of honesty, respect, and love. And slowly, quietly, life returned to a gentle rhythm, the kind that carries warmth in its simplicity and peace in its honesty. Looking back now, I realize how small moments can carry the heaviest weight. A card, a choice, a single gesture, they can test you in ways you never imagined. That Thursday night, the card, the temptation, and the quiet struggle that followed felt enormous at the time. But in reality, it was a lesson disguised as an obstacle, a way to show me the strength I had quietly carried all along. I've learned that love isn't measured by gifts, by money, or by grand gestures. Love is measured in patience, in understanding, and in the courage to stay true to your values even when it's difficult. I've learned that mistakes don't have to define you, but they do shape you. And I've learned that the quiet, unassuming moments, a shared meal, a kind word, a hand held in silence, often matter far more than anything flashy or expensive. Daniel and I found our rhythm again, gentler and wiser than before. We talk more openly now, about everything, our fears, our expectations, our dreams, and even our disagreements. I no longer feel the subtle tension that once made me shrink in my own apartment, and he no longer assumes that money can solve every problem. We've learned to navigate our worlds together, respecting our differences while building a shared space of honesty and care. Sometimes, I see the card tucked away in a drawer, and I smile quietly. It doesn't tempt me anymore. Instead, it reminds me of the growth we both experienced, the lessons learned, and the strength of quiet choices. It reminds me that integrity matters, not for applause, not for recognition, but for the quiet, steady satisfaction of knowing you did what was right. I've also learned about forgiveness, how fragile it can feel, yet how transformative it is when given sincerely. I forgave Daniel for his careless choice, and he forgave me from my distance and hesitation. We forgave each other not because everything was perfect, but because we were willing to listen, to reflect, and to grow together. And that, I think, is the true heart of any relationship. Life doesn't hand you neat, tidy resolutions. It hands you moments, some joyful, some painful, and it's up to you to decide how to respond. The test of character isn't in avoiding difficulty, but in facing it with honesty and grace. That's the lesson I carry now, quietly, every day, in the way I speak, the choices I make, and the love I give. I still feel the same warmth for Daniel that I did when we first met, but now it is deeper, steadier, shaped not by easy moments, but by the challenges we faced and overcame together. There is a peace in knowing that we can stumble, that we can feel temptation, fear, or uncertainty, and still find our way back to each other, stronger, wiser, and more understanding than before. And so when I look at the rain tapping against our balcony window, or the small notes he leaves on the fridge, or the quiet moments we share over coffee in the morning, I smile. Not because life is perfect, but because it is real. Not because love is easy, but because it is earned, nurtured, and cherished every day. In the end, I think that's what matters most. The courage to do what's right, the willingness to forgive, and the patience to let love grow quietly, steadily, and the spaces between mistakes and lessons. That is the story I carry with me, the truth I hold close, and the quiet hope that guides me through every day. Life may offer tests, temptations, and challenges, but it also offers the chance to rise above them, to stay true to yourself, and to love deeply, without conditions, without compromise, and without fear. And that, I realize, is a gift far greater than any amount of money could ever be.